Welcome to Morningstar. I'm Larissa Fernand, and with me today is Saurabh Mukherjea, the founder and chief investment officer at Marcellus Investment Managers.
My pleasure, Larissa. Thank you for taking time out to talk to me.
Okay, so my first question is going to be a bit brutal. So in 2020, you were loved. You were loved by everyone. And now, a few years down the road, when performance has not been that good, you've been criticized across the board. So my question to you is, how do you deal with it mentally and emotionally? Constantly watched, constantly analyzed, constantly scrutinized, praised and mocked all the time.
At one level, I think you're like everybody else, right? So if I go back to my school days, when the teacher gives you A plus, you feel happy you've done something useful, and when you fail, I failed in Hindi in class three. I remember it wasn't a nice feeling. My mom absolutely hammered me senseless when I failed Hindi in class three. But all of that being said, there are, I think, there are a few things all of us in Marcellus have very consciously done over the years to make sure that neither the praise nor the mockery nor the criticism uh, uh, forms a big part of our lives. And I'll tell you how we have tried to do this. So, firstly, the core team has worked together now for 20 years. It's going to be 20 years next year. And therefore, we've been through difficult times together. We've been through good times together. I would say we've been to hell and back several times as a team, and that really helps. Secondly, in my case, my wife and I have known each other since primary school. So it's been, the family circle that in which we have lived, and it's a pretty close knit family. That's also between the United Kingdom where my parents live, India, between Delhi, Bombay, where part of the family lives in Delhi, part lives in Bombay, part lives in Kolkata. I think we've sort of hung together as a family quite nicely, and that also helps. And thirdly, I've had much the same set of friends now since I was in high school. So my high school friends are still some of my closest friends. These are people from Delhi. Some of them live here. Some of them live abroad. Um, and having a close group of friends, having a close knit family, and the same sort of colleagues for 20 years, that's the world I honestly live in. So within that world, whether people are praising me or mocking me in the broader world simply doesn't count for much. So when I sit down with my parents, they are clients of Marcellus, but they are pretty oblivious to other people's praise or mockery. And similarly with my better half, and similarly with my school friends. And that's how I think most of us learn to deal with all of this. We've also had family members. So one of my extended family members captained the Indian cricket team for a while. So I've seen him go through the cycle. Uh, one of my ancestors was a pivotal figure in Indian political history. I would say a formative figure in independent India's history. And I've seen my ancestor uh, pilloried at times and sung, praises sung to high heaven at times. So both within my generation of relatives in my family and more distant relatives, I've seen people go through the cycle. So it's not a big deal. It's not a big part of our lives. At one level, I'm glad whatever we're doing is worth discussing, but another level, it's not other people's commentary on either their praise or mockery is not something that is a central part of our day-to-day lives.
When I look at your entire career from London School of Economics, you set up Clear Capital in London, you came to India, you must have evolved quite a bit in these different scenarios, different times. So tell me something about your evolution as an investor. What did you believe passionately that you no longer now do so?
In my mid 20s, when I co-founded Clear Capital, like any other youngster, I learned my investing from reading Benjamin Graham, from reading Warren Buffett, from reading Peter Lynch, much as I think most as millions of people across the world do. And if you sort of come at investing from that sort of academic standpoint, you end up believing that valuation is some incredibly important thing, and getting good companies at reasonable prices is somehow the holy grail of investing. And my UK years were very much like that, right? It's also the case that the UK was and remains a low growth economy. So in any low growth economy, valuation is bound to play a more important role. But the entire Clear Capital stint, '03 through to '08, when we sold the company, was about identifying reasonably well-run companies, but at affordable valuation. Then we made a name for ourselves in the UK small cap market for doing that. The first 4 or 5 years in India, I realized that even more important than valuation is integrity. if you invest in promoters and companies in India who are crooked, who are corrupt, there is nothing in India that will save you. Like corrupt, powerful promoters can absolutely leave you with nothing in your pocket if you invest in their companies. And that first 3-4 year period was really a training period in understanding accounting fraud, understanding how clever, powerful promoters rob minority shareholders of what is rightfully theirs. And I've described this in Diamonds in the Dust. I think my colleagues and I, in the first 200 pages of Diamonds in the Dust, have explained how many prominent companies stole lots of money, and the promoters ran away to London or ended up going to prison. Around 2014, 15, 16, we went through that phase which sort of shaped our thinking on moats and valuation. The two are related. Moats and valuation are inherently very tightly related. What we realized around that period, the mid teens of the decade, 2014, 15, 16, was because of the changes happening in India, because of the changes happening in what remains a high growth economy, what India has been able to get, and this is singular, there is no other emerging market which comes close to India in this regard. What India has been able to get is a dozen or so companies who can grow free cash flows at 20% plus over many decades, right? Over extended periods of time. This is very rare. It doesn't happen in too many countries, and it hasn't happened in any other EM. China doesn't have anything remotely similar, for instance, right? And because you're getting these companies growing free cash flows at 20% plus over several decades at a time, the valuation, the DCF valuation, the discounted cash flow valuations are actually enormous for these companies. And the stock market wasn't appreciating it, isn't appreciating it. And we realized, therefore, it's a once in a lifetime chance to buy these companies, keep buying them in as large a quantum as we can buy, and ride with them as they keep growing their cash flows at 20%. And that's when I realized that, looking at using PE multiples, for instance, to value companies, I realized is a useless activity. Often the best times to buy these companies, often the best times to buy, say, companies like Titan, like Bajaj Finance, is when the PE multiples are at their highest. And a lot of people in our country balk at this. They believe that PE has some inherently predictive power. That's not true. Neither does the data show it's not true, nor does common sense and understanding discounted cash flow suggest it's true. So understanding valuations from a very different perspective, not the Ben Graham perspective, not the Peter Lynch perspective, understanding valuations from the perspective of living in India and seeing this dozen or so companies grow cash flows at 20%, free cash flows at 20% over extended periods of time was the education by itself. And we turned that into an investment discipline through what we have written in Diamonds in the Dust. The first half of Diamonds in the Dust is the accounting fraud piece. The second half is the valuation piece.
This is something a lot of people would passionately disagree with you, that buying at any price, they would be horrified.
No, so this is very interesting. I've never said buy at any price. What I've said is PE multiples don't help you figure out valuation, right? So I'll explain why I think people get the wrong end of the stick on valuations, right? So let's take a very easy example to understand why PE multiples are utterly useless for investing. So imagine you're in May 2020, right? Bajaj Finance has fallen 60% in the preceding 4 months due to the COVID panic. And yet the forward PE is through the roof because in FY21, nobody in their right mind expects Bajaj Finance to make any money, right? So Bajaj Finance is down 65%, but the forward PE is through the roof. And you could do the analysis on Titan as well. Titan was in a very similar position. Nobody expected Titan to make any money in FY21. Now, interestingly, Larissa, FY21 indeed was fundamentally from a profit perspective, really dire for Bajaj Finance and for Titan. But had you bought Bajaj Finance in May 2020, when the PE must be some 100 plus level, had you bought Bajaj Finance then, the company triples in the next 2 years. So nobody in their right mind should believe PE will ever give you a realistic signal on what to buy, what to sell. With companies of this quality, if you take 1 year forward PE and try to use that as a measure of investing, you're not going to make any money. And I stress again, all the data in the world statistically shows that the forward PE has zero predictive power. And I gave you an anecdote to explain the same. Let me explain it in a slightly different way. Let me take 2 companies from our portfolio. Over the last 15 years, over the time I've lived in India, Bajaj Finance's PE has always been higher than HDFC Bank's PE, always, right? And therefore, a PE devotee would submit to you that HDFC Bank will compound faster than Bajaj, given that the PE is cheaper, right? And because HDFC Bank is cheaper, HDFC Bank will compound faster in PE. And yet, if you see the last 15 years, Bajaj consistently compounds faster than HDFC Bank, both on PAT and on share price, even though it's consistently more expensive than HDFC Bank on PE, right? So that's where I think people get the wrong end of the stick. And I'm happy to discuss this for hours on end. I don't think PE multiple gets you anywhere in valuation. What you have to do is learn how to value companies from first principles. You have to figure out how long will free cash flows grow. That's not an easy thing to figure out. Let's take a stock that we don't own. Will Jubilant FoodWorks' cash flows grow at an extended rate for 5 years? Or 15 years or 20 years, right? Will Titan's free cash flows grow at 20-21% for the next 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years? If you don't know the answer to that question, no amount of staring at price multiples will help you get anywhere in investing. And that's where I think we've tried to set our stall out and say, this is how we think about things. We're happy to ask people, what do you tell us what you think? And we're happy to learn from others, right? There are people who have figured out valuation better than we have, and we're happy to learn from them as to how should one go about thinking about valuation.
When talking to you, I'm often reminded what a lot of people have said, that you're a very good marketer. You're very good at convincing people, controlling the narrative, selling an idea. Okay, so you're very good at asset gathering. So I want to ask you, how do you make sure that you are not getting lost in the echo chamber of your mind?
I think on this marketing business, I find that quite intriguing. So, I've studied, say, Prime Minister Modi's speeches quite carefully. I've studied people like Warren Buffett's books, his annual reports quite carefully. I've seen successful friends of mine who work as management consultants. I've seen successful journalists such as yourself. I haven't found a single successful professional in my working career who's not good at articulating concepts. I think it's an essential prerequisite for success in professional life to be able to talk and write clearly. So whether it is, say, in the foreign context of Buffett or a Peter Lynch, or in the Indian context, say, successful investors such as, say, Ramdev Agarwalji, Nilesh Shahji at Kotak. And these guys are clear. They're clear at articulating the point of view. You or I might not always agree with what they say, but we know where they stand. And I think that's a prerequisite for success in our life. Now, your question about how do I ensure I don't get locked in an echo chamber? Remember, it's not just me. There's 120 other people in the firm. The firm is owned by staff. 35 out of 120 staff own a stake in Marcellus. Many of my colleagues who worked with me for extended periods of time own huge chunks of the firm. I can't simply say it's all me and I'll talk to myself effectively and run the firm like that. It doesn't work like that. Other investment professionals have an equally large say. These are people who are well qualified, they're intelligent, we have fairly ferocious debates within the firm. And we challenge each other, and often basis the challenge, we end up buying and selling stocks. And we also have 10,000 clients who are the people who run India. Our client base basically are the people who run this country. They're not people who are going to sit back lightly and listen to me if I'm talking nonsense. So we have promoters of large companies, we have CEOs of large companies, we have parts of the armed forces. Abroad, we have large universities in UK and USA, pension funds in North America for whom we manage money. And these are people, the institutional investors who have trusted us with their money. Each of them have 30, 40 trained professionals who meet thousands of people like me. So I find it quite unbelievable that we'll be unchallenged in our narrative. Every day we come to work, we have to answer questions to our clients, to the people whose money we manage, as to what are we doing and why are we doing it. And that is a huge check and balance to any megalomaniacal tendencies I might have.
Do you panic? Or what's your reaction if money is suddenly pulled out of your fund?
Honestly, when money comes in, it's not some source of euphoria. Neither when money gets pulled out. It's not as if when I go home, the first thing my wife asks me is, "Honey, how much money came into Marcellus?" I don't think it's a meaningful part of the discussion. And and by the same token, the firm has been set up, the way the cost structure has been created, the way the balance sheet has been created, is whether money comes in or not, the way we manage money, the way we run our lives, the way we run the business is largely unchanged. Um, I think I will go back to the question you began with, right? If people say nice things about you, it feels nicer. It feels nicer to be appreciated for what you do rather than criticized. So that more than the financial trigger is what we live and work for. We're trying our best to. We're trying our best to do a good job for the people, the 10,000 people who entrusted us with their money. From inception to now, we've beaten the index by 2%. As you rightly said, from Jan 22, when the Russia-Ukraine war began, through to April 23, we had a torrid time. We were down, we had a drawdown of 15% in our large cap product, and I think 17-18% in our small and mid cap product. So they were difficult times, but 90% of the client base stayed. They've reposed their faith in us. We carry on trying to do the best for them. This fiscal has been a much better experience. We're up 17% versus the market being up 12 or 13%. If you look at the last 5 years, right, our track record is now, approach is 5 years now. Barely 10% of the managers in India, whether across in PMS or mutual funds, barely 10% of fund managers in India have beaten the index. We're in that 10%. We hope that over the next 3 years, over the next 5 years as well, we'll be there. But we also appreciate it's not a cakewalk, it's a lot of work. And we stay focused on that rather than agonizing about fund inflows. We're not trying to sort of sell the company. So there's no great rush to gather a lot of assets and then sell the company. It's a firm run by staff for staff. So the fund inflow piece is not a big trigger. The client input, the client criticism, the client appreciation is a far more powerful factor.
Tell me about the role of creativity in investing, because you popularized coffee can investing. Who inspired you? Was it Nick Train, Terry Smith, Bailey Gifford?
So it's a mixture of the two. So I'll give you sort of, I'm intrigued by this question because inadvertently, perhaps you've taken me back to some of the sort of most powerful influences on my life. So a gentleman called John Kay, he used to teach at the LSE. Subsequently, he created a very successful consultancy called London Economics, and he was my first employer. And I loved learning from John. John taught me about how to think about companies and competitive advantage. He's the author of a legendary book called The Foundations of Corporate Success. John Kay subsequently became Sir John Kay. And when I co-founded Clear Capital, John became the chairman and continued teaching us. Now, John's investing track record is outstanding. He's created one of the largest endowment funds in the UK for St. John's College, and he ran it over 30 years, 12% sterling compounding. So he beat hands down the legendary Yale endowment fund run by David Swenson. So John had a tremendous investment track record. I learned a lot from him about how to take concepts around competitive advantage and link them to investing. Around 12 or 13 years ago, John Kay and Bailey Gifford teamed up to launch something called the Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust. And within that Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust, with John sitting on the chair on the board as the chair of the advisory committee, or chair of the investment committee. Between I think 2010 or 2012 to 2022, these guys compounded at 25 or 26% and ended up becoming a £100 billion fund. Right? And Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust was these concepts around identify great companies with deep moats around technology, huge ability to compound over 10 years. And John took his economic concepts, which he applied for the St. John's College Endowment Fund, where it was a £1 billion endowment. He applied them to the Bailey Gifford Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust and created 10x in 10 years for the investment trust clients. So when we set up Marcellus 5 years ago, we requested John to be an advisor, and he continues advising us on the concepts we've discussed over the last half an hour. So that's been one influence. The other influence has been Terry Smith. So when I was in Clear Capital, I used to cover his stock. Terry ran a company called Collins Stewart. So because he was the owner of the company, I used to go and meet him to understand what Colin Stewart was up to. And he'd already published his legendary forensic accounting book called Accounting for Growth, about how some of the most prominent companies in the UK steal money. And I'd sort of read that book inside out 6 times over. And when he sold Colin Stewart and then he set up Fundsmith, obviously all of us in Marcellus became fervent devotees of reading his newsletters, understanding his style of communication. And again, Terry Smith's style of investing: buy great companies, don't try to do this chipping and chopping and this whatever is known as value investing. Buy great companies, patiently stay invested. You will go through periods of underperformance. I think, like us, unsurprisingly, when we underperformed, Terry also underperformed, albeit on a much higher base. He manages 20 billion pounds. We manage barely $1.5 billion. So those have been the intellectual influences. Some of us in Marcellus are Fundsmith clients. Some of us in Marcellus are Lindsay Train clients. And again, the Lindsay Trail newsletters, the Fundsmith newsletters, John's intellectual influences, they have come together. In the Indian context, I've found the work that Bharat Shah ji has done to be very, very powerful, very useful. And combining Bharat Shah ji's learnings, combining what I've learned from my upbringing in the UK, we were able to write Coffee Can Investing in 2018. Buy great companies, sit patiently, don't try to get swayed by macro and day-to-day market gyrations.
So in this whole scheme of investing, where does the chance, gut feel, intuition, luck, karma, how does it all play out according to you?
So look, I think where it plays out is information, right? Information on ROC, cash flows, quarterly conference calls, even information around visiting stores, visiting factories. Information is now available to everybody, not just professional investors, even semi-professional investors. And there are millions of them in India, serious semi-professional investors. They have access to all the information. What you and I are trying to do is translate that information into insight, right? So you could read, let's take an example. Everybody in the country could read the Bajaj Finance last 10 years of annual reports, listen to Rajiv Jain's quarterly conference calls, visit a Chroma store and see a Bajaj Finance desk at operation, visit a Vijay Sales store and see a Bajaj Finance desk at operation. Everybody can do that. I suspect 99% of people will come back and say Bajaj Finance is an NBFC and it lends to people who want to buy consumer durables. And therefore, given that it makes an ROE of 25% on an ROA of 4%, it should trade at a price to book of, say, 4 times, right? That's the conclusion 99% of investors will reach. But basis the same information, the same store visits, I think one out of 100 investors will say Bajaj Finance is actually not a non-bank lender. It's a tech company. It's the largest user of Salesforce in the world. It employs more electrical engineers and computer scientists than any other firm in India. It potentially has a bigger data repository on affluent Indians than any other firm. And basis these intangible assets, Bajaj Finance actually is not an expensive company. It's actually a really cheap company at current valuations, right? So that's the role of creativity. The same information is available to everybody. Basis your and my reading, training, our upbringing, our intuition, we're able to translate information into insight. Obviously, the way my colleagues and I do it, we will get it wrong sometimes, we'll get it right sometimes. If we get it more right than we get it wrong, we'll be all right. But without that final burst of creativity, without that spark of imagination, it's impossible to go from information to insight. And if you don't have insight, you can't make money in any aspect of life. It's not just, I think, investing, even in media, in journalism, in politics. I think without insight, without creativity, you don't have insight. Without insight, you don't have success.
Okay, so that's creativity and that's insight and that's skill. Luck, how do you view luck?
So here is how I see it, right? So luck is the cards we are dealt with. So in the ovarian lottery, I think I lucked out. My mom went to Presidency College, Kolkata, and studied economics. My dad went to IIT Kharagpur and did his master's in engineering. He then worked for ISRO. My mom was a maths teacher. So in the ovarian lottery, I've had a decent set of cards, right? They would have been even better had my parents been part of the Wall Street elite. That I got a decent draw, right? So all of us are born with a certain draw of cards from the ovarian lottery, right? That's the luck piece, right? I don't think I can do much about the cards I've been given with. I don't think anybody can. How we then deal with those cards? What we make of those cards is skill, right? Luck is what we are given. That's the set of resources and circumstances life gives us. Right? And at the simplest level, the ovarian lottery, with borrowing a phrase from Warren Buffett here, in the ovarian lottery, I got a certain draw. How I then deal with that draw, what my colleagues and I make of our lives, is goes on to become skill.
Lovely. What makes you insecure?
When my wife says that because of the amount of time I spend reading and working, the children are growing up without a father. That's the one which really gets my goat. And for a few weeks, I then spend more time with the kids until I revert back to the mean. It's a big challenge. It is a big challenge. I think I've seen this with my rest of my family and my colleagues as well. You get so wrapped up in your work, the world that you and I are discussing. This world becomes your world in totality, and you forget that there are real relationships in a world of emotions and relationships well beyond the realms of this office. And if you're not too careful, you end up abandoning that for a world which potentially, as you said, Larissa, could be an echo chamber.
Okay, my last line question to you is very simple. Is there a reason you're not on social media?
There are Our compliance asks us to post certain of our newsletters and our blogs on social media, which we do from time to time. But beyond that, I'm not so sure, what I'll get out of it. A lot of people say if you're on WhatsApp, you can communicate better with 20 other people. But I'm not that interested in communicating with lots of people. I'm a fairly introverted guy. I'm happy, with my family, friends, and colleagues. As I said, finding enough hours in the day as it is a problem. If I now open myself to all from the other exogenous influences, that's when I think really, Larissa, that's where the real echo chamber lies. The real echo chamber is actually social media, where you simply end up reflecting whatever is the received wisdom at that point in time.
That's fantastic. Saurabh, it was really, really good chatting with you. I thank you
Thank you.
so
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. This is Larissa for Morningstar.